Okay, so we're on to Chapter 5, and these notes I think are going to be probably a little bit shorter than some of the other ones. So this chapter focuses on research proposals. I'm going to step a little bit away from that, and we're going to talk a little bit about how to structure a research article or a dissertation. There is a common format for writing these articles or dissertations. First, you're going to have an introduction. In the introduction, you want to just sort of broadly introduce the topic, state what you plan to do in your research, and state what kind of significance that's going to have for the field. This section is usually pretty relatively short, especially in a research article. In a dissertation, it could be much longer. It might be 10, 20 pages. Usually at the end of the introduction section, you'll end up with a research purpose and research questions. And if you're doing a quantitative study, you'll probably have your hypotheses as well. The second section for a research article is the literature review, which we talked about last time. This is where you're going to cover all of the other relevant information articles and things that you've read and explain how these are informing your study. The third section is your methods section. And this is where you lay out exactly what it is that you intend to do in order to answer your research question. The majority of this class is going to focus on this particular section. How do you do research? How do you answer research questions? Under methods, you'll find some common subsections. First of all, you probably want to talk about your participants. This generally includes some discussion of how you recruited them for the study, how you selected them, what was your process for selection. In quantitative research, you'll probably have a lot of demographic information, sort of mean age or race, gender, socioeconomic status, whatever seems relevant for your study. And in a qualitative study, these are usually more detailed descriptions of each individual participant instead of sort of a summary of the entire group. After that, you'll probably also want to describe your data collection procedures. Once you've recruited all of these participants to your study, what are you actually going to do with them? How are you going to extract information from them that's going to help you answer your research question? So that's the kind of information that would go here. For a quantitative study, they'll typically have a section to talk about the instrumentation, and this sort of describes the tools that they're using to collect the data. So if you have a survey, they might talk about how they've constructed that survey. Or if it's sort of an assessment, they might have some validity data, and we're going to talk a little bit more about all of that in a couple of chapters. In qualitative research, they don't necessarily use a lot of instruments to collect the data. You might see some research questions or maybe like an observation schedule. But it's often said that the researcher themselves is the tool of data collection in a qualitative study. That's not to say that you should call qualitative researchers a bunch of tools unless you want to start a fight.
Why'd you call me that?
I'd like to apologize for the lady.
Well, I ain't talking to you.
Look, if you don't want to accept an honest apology, why don't you go back to the bar and forget about it?
In the subjectivity section, you'll see them talk about their own subjectivity, their own positionality towards the research, some of their own experiences and orientations, that sort of thing. You might also find a subsection under methods discussing how the researchers have established rigor in their studies. In quantitative research, this will deal with reliability and validity issues. In qualitative research, they use terms like trustworthiness or credibility, transparency, and things. And we're going to talk a lot more about that later. And then you may see a section on ethical considerations that have gone into the study, how the researchers are going to protect the welfare of their participants and so forth. So after the methods section, then you'll have a finding or results section. Before you actually get into collecting data, you should probably have a good idea of what you want to do with the data once you collect it. How are you going to analyze it and make sense of it? But this is where you report the analysis of your data. In quantitative research, this section is very heavy on statistics. In qualitative research, it usually takes a more narrative form. But in both cases, the researcher is only reporting on what they've found. That's important. Now, the next section is discussion, or conclusions, sometimes they call it. And in this section, you get to be a little bit more interpretive of your data. So it's a chance for the author to talk about what their findings actually mean, and to make some conclusions from them. Additionally, under this section, you'll find usually a couple of things. You'll find limitations and implications for future studies and things like that. Limitations don't necessarily mean that the study sucks. All studies have limitations. It's more of a way of drawing boundaries about what can and cannot be concluded from a study. A research proposal will usually take you right up to the point where you're just about to recruit participants prior to collecting the data and everything. That means you should have sections 1, 2, and 3, introduction, literature review, and methods, very clearly thought out before you even start to contact people for to participate in the study. So a question maybe some people are asking is, why even bother with all this? It seems like it's kind of a lot of work to do. However, if you're creating a research proposal, it means that you're carefully thinking through everything that's going to go into your study, so you're not just haphazardly going out there and trying to collect whatever data you can find. It's an opportunity to strategize exactly what you need to do in order to adequately answer your research question. Through doing the research proposal, you might also be able to speculate on some of the challenges that you're going to face. There's always these little logistical kind of considerations that are involved, like where are you going to do your research, right? But basically, if you go into a study without this clear plan of what you're going to do, well, your study's going to lack rigor, which makes it pretty much a waste of time anyway. And then you're going to end up feeling just totally lost and overwhelmed by everything. A second reason that you're going to do a research proposal before doing the research is that in many cases in educational research, the study needs to be approved by the Institutional Review Board, or the IRB is commonly called. IRB forms tend to be pretty detailed about your research and what you're going to be doing with your human subjects in order to make sure that whatever it is that you are doing is ethical. So if you complete the IRB form and you've done your lit review so that you're asking, informed questions, then you're most of the way towards a research proposal anyway. That information's all there. It might just be a case of writing it up in a certain format. So that means that, after you've collected the data, then you can focus specifically on chapters 4 and 5 and not have to worry about writing everything. Of course, it's always a good idea to go back and revise. Research proposals tend to be written in future tense, for example, and articles are more past tense, what we did, as opposed to what we will do. And then the final reason that you would do a research proposal before collecting the data is, in the words of Puff Daddy, it's all about the Benjamins, baby.
It's all about the Benjamins, baby. It's all about the Benjamins, baby. It's all about the Benjamins,
what y'all wanna do?
baby.
Wanna be ballers, shot callers, brawlers. We'll be dipping in the bins with the spoilers.
If you're pursuing a grant for your research, the funders are usually going to want a detailed account of what it is that you're actually going to do with their money, and what they're going to get in return for it. A grant's not just free money or some bonus for being, super awesome. When you get a grant, it's expected that the money will be used towards sort of the cost of doing research. So generally, when applying for a grant, in addition to doing your introduction and your lit review and your methodology, generally they're going to want to see sort of a budget as well to break down sort of the cost of the research. But let's get serious here for a minute. 99.9% of research conducted in education is not grant funded and doesn't need to be grant funded. Most research is done by faculty or grad students, like you, operating on a relatively small scale and not really requiring a lot of physical resources. Not every study that we do requires the use of an MRI machine, right? Most often we're conducting this sort of low-tech or no-tech kind of research. We're doing interviews and observations, like in qualitative research, or maybe we're doing some action research in our classrooms. We might be sending out surveys or things like that. We're collecting outcome data, maybe in the form of self-reports after some kind of intervention. Yes, you can do some really cool, big research stuff with a lot of funding, but don't let the fact that you don't have a grant deter you from doing any kind of research. Some of the best research is done with just whatever you have at your disposal.